course you know what I'm doing.
Of course you know what you're doing. Yes. Daniel, I will say that I would make an addition to the questions just about favorite words. In 20 years, there's certainly been ones that stand out because they repeat the word lists every 5 years. So in coaching 20 years, some of these words I've had multiple times.
Yeah.
The middle school, I started the season and I talked about when I'd had these words before, and I talked about 15 years ago when I had this list, and then I looked at them and I'm like, none of you were even born yet. That made me feel old. But it's great because I've had all this experience with different words, but some of them always stood out throughout the seasons. So that would be a good addition.
Yeah. Okay, kind of just to start this out, I know kind of already got asked, during the first interview. What exactly is spell bowl?
That is a great question. Okay, so most people are familiar with a spelling bee. They either had one in school, they participated in one in school, either in a classroom or the whole school. Maybe have even watched the National Spelling Bee on TV because that's broadcast on ESPN every year from Washington, D.C. But Spell Bowl is a unique program to the state of Indiana. This is only its 41st year, and which is strange when I put the shirt on this morning thinking, I've been a part of Spell Bowl for half of Spell Bowl's life. So it's different than the spelling bee because you write words down instead of saying them out loud, and it's a team effort instead of spelling individually. So there are nine words in a round, and at the high school level, there are 10 spellers, so a total of 90 words or 90 points.
Yeah, that's great. Just like lots of spelling,
Yeah, lots of spelling. Yes. Yep.
Kind of the entire point, but yeah.
It is. And it's, thus the name. We're trying to learn how to spell words. I would say I will add the best thing of that, again, compared to the spelling bee, is Spell Bowl has a finite word list. So like the high school word list this year had 2,200 words. Now it sounds like a lot of words, but every week we would challenge ourselves to learn 2 pages at a time. Then I would chunk out words that had hyphens or spaces, capitalized words, unique words, sometimes foreign words, things that were going to be challenging. And throughout the season, we learned lots of words.
Yeah, I've had some friends at Spell Bowl, especially
Okay.
this year.
Yeah.
Some like Will Schmidt, Saab.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, those people. Sometimes they're like, they show me the Spell Bowl list.
Yes.
They show me some of the most ridiculous words I've seen in my entire life.
Yes.
I can't remember them off the top of my head. They probably can.
Right. I'm sure Will especially could, because he went on to the state individual finals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, going on to the next big question.
Yes.
Why exactly is Spell Bowl important?
So it used to be, when this program started 41 years ago, learning how to spell words. In those 41 years, we've had technology, and especially these days in class, Chromebooks that do spell check for you. And so you start typing a word in and you're like, oh, no, that's not how you spell it. And so recently I've had more resistance of like, why do I even need to know how to spell words? But then the answer to that question is really what Spell Bowl does for you is it expands your vocabulary. Students leave from one season to the next knowing so many more words than they did before. Now, whether they won't retain all of them, but some of them will stand out, either words that they missed or words that they thought were fun or words that were really hard to study or to spell, and they studied them over and over again, and so they'll remember them.
Yeah. Just great, very important stuff about Spell Bowl is just outside of like just regular spelling vocabulary lists. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And then so we had 2 words on the list this year that kind of stumped us because they sound exactly the same: glutinous and glutinous. And then they tagged on the word gluttonous. And, they were familiar with all 3 words, but didn't know how they were spelled differently. And I would say you could ask any of the Spell Bowl members who were on the team this season, and all of them could spell all 3 forms of that word because we talked about it so many times.
Yeah. Okay, going on to the next question. What exactly did you love so much about this program to make you do it for 20 whole years?
That's a great question. I mean, first answer obviously is the students. I loved the interaction with the students. I loved seeing their growth throughout each season, and especially for those students that I had in sixth grade through eighth grade when I was only coaching at Indian Springs, and then when I added the high school position for the last 11 years, some of the students, like Bree Montel this year, I've had since she was in sixth grade. In fact, I recruited her from the fifth grade Whitley County Spelling Bee, and she's been unspellable for 7 years with me. And so, you build a rapport with some of those. I lost 5 seniors last year, and all of them had been a part of the team, both in the high school and the middle school. And so there was a connection there that we, continued to want to learn how to spell new words, but also there was a rapport that was built in that. I still get, requests to write recommendation letters for colleges. And um, Eric Yeager that I mentioned before texted me one day when he was in college at Valparaiso and said, my professor commented on my vocabulary in my paper. And he said, and I specifically used a number of spellable words that I've learned over the years. And so it really did pay off in their long term. And for me to witness that has been the best.
Yeah, and I think you already went over like the majority of what the next question was.
Okay.
What does exactly do for students?
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, they walk away with a greater vocabulary. They read a book that maybe is more challenging, and they're like, "Oh, I learned that word in Spellable. I know what the context of this is." Um, Annalisa, she this year it several times in practice would be like, "That's a French word," or "Oh, that word's German, so it wouldn't be spelled this way." And just the context and where some of these words came from, it was just awesome to see how that evolves for students throughout the years too.
Yeah. I'm going to combine some of these two questions into one. What are some of the most memorable moments you've had out of Spellbowl in the last like 20 years?
Memorable moments. We'll start with the most depressing. Um, so the middle school team was in competition for the conference at the time. It was previous to NE8, and we were at Edgewood Middle School, and I had a young team. So a number of them, maybe half of them, had not been on the team before. So lots of sixth graders or new seventh graders, and we had really hard words. The person who chose, even though it's a finite list and we're only going to do those words, it was early in the season, and we have not gone through all the words yet. Out of 72 words, we got a 9, and that was rough. That's the lowest score in 20 years. But wow, did we bounce back? Because that was a group then that later won the conference the next year and went on to the state finals the next year. And so sometimes when you're at your lowest, you push yourself even more. That happened for the high school team last year. I think it was just we'd gone to the state finals every year since I'd been coaching. We'd won the conference every year since I'd been coaching. And last year, some of the seniors were involved in so many other things that they did not put as much time and effort into the studying. And so we missed going to the state finals by one word. If we had one more correctly spelled word, we would have gone back to the state finals. So those were the challenging times that really kind of pushed us. And so this year we did it. We won the conference again for the 11th year in a row. We went to the state finals for the 10th out of the 11th year. And those times, I think, are the most memorable. A fun story from one of the first times the high school team went to the state finals. Eric Burkholder, which I mentioned before, he was probably a junior at that time. We were stopping at a restaurant before we went to the state finals. And Eric was all about food and knew that if he could challenge in a positive way, maybe I would treat him. So he came up to me while we were eating and he said, Mr. Beckner, if I could recite a whole column of words, no, all of the words on page 7 in order, would you give me ice cream? I'm like, absolutely. I would love to hear you do that. And so without looking at the list, he recites every word on the list, and the whole team is just like silent, listening to every word. And when he got done with the list with that row, he everybody was like applauding in the restaurant. It was like the coolest thing because he challenged himself to do that. It wasn't something I asked him to do that. Um, those were just awesome moments. I would say the other things that stand out are as we get to the end of as we get to the end of a competition, especially one that was like really close. So in 2016, the high school team made it to the state finals. We had a really excellent season. We had scored an 80 out of 90, which is the highest score that we've ever accomplished. And we got to the end of the state finals, and we were in the last round. Chris Robinson was spelling, and we had practiced some on the bus. We knew that we were close enough to winning the state championship if Chris spelled a certain number of words right. And it came down to the very last word, which happened to be a word that we studied on the bus. He missed several of them throughout and the whole team was just like, oh, come on, Chris, you got this. And he spelled the last word right, and we won the state finals. And those moments are just like so amazing to walk through that season with the students with the same words, words that we've had fun with or challenged by, and to see them walk away with a state championship and a banner, and then 2 years in a row to do that was just a highlight for sure.
Yeah. And throughout this interview, you've talked about the students, the students, students. You keep
Yes.
raving about the students. What exactly do you think a student needs to be able to do to be the most successful in Spell Bowl?
There are two things, and it could be one or the other. One is just somebody who is passionate about words. They want to know how it's spelled. They want to know what it means. They want to know what it's derived from. Um, and those students really push themselves. So, like I mentioned, Ava before. Ava graduated last year. I'd had her on the team since sixth grade. Mrs. Wyatt transcribed in Braille every word every year. Uh, Ava started studying in the summer before practice even started in September. But in sixth grade, when she started, she was not the best speller, but she worked at it and she worked hard at it. And she also started spelling perfect rounds and did that time and time again. Even up to her last couple of years, she spelled every round perfect. And that was just quite an achievement to see that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of pushing away from like the in school stuff to move to more to like the city of Columbia City.
Yeah,
What exactly do you think the community should know most about Spell Bowl? And what exactly you've done here for the program?
because we've had a lot of success, and that's been highlighted in the newspaper and through WCCS social media and things like that. I walk into Kroger or something, and somebody will say, "Oh, I see the Spell Bowl team, won the conference again." And we had a Spell Bowl fundraiser at Culver's a few weeks ago, and raised the most money we ever have in the 20 years I've been doing it. One night we do a fundraiser, and we had a huge community support. Partly is, I'm a pastor, and so I know a lot of people in the community, but teaching and Mrs. Beckner teaching now for a long time. We won't name the number. And, it's just being a part of the community. They see the achievements, the accomplishments, and they want to congratulate the students too. And again, I want it always to be student focused. And so when students at church, I had a student who I had, Alex Sharpenberg, was a student in the middle school team. He was on the team that first went to the state finals in 2012 and 2013. And as a pastor, later in his life, he asked me if I would officiate his wedding. And that was cool to reconnect with him. But then I already knew his wife, or his mother, Mrs. Andonian, who was teaching here up until last year and until she retired. and they started coming to our church a few years ago. And so I get to see Alex on a regular basis again. And so those kind of community connections, um, when I see a former spell bowler in a in a store on a college campus, maybe in Fort Wayne, when we're shopping or something, and you just take the time to reconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you've been kind of getting
I
teary at the
know.
entire time.
I
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's in my DNA, I think, just spell bowl for 20 years. It's just something that I've lived and done and breathed words for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. You want to talk about the words. You really want to talk about
Okay,
the words. You
just a
loved
few,
about it.
just a
Yeah.
few. So, there are always words that stand out. The middle school team for years, again, the lists repeat every 5 years, but sometimes they will take some words out and they'll put some new words in. So whether they're words that haven't been on the list before or maybe just new words, um, the students tend to always pick out obviously the first word and the last word. There's always something about that part. I always point out, make sure you learn all the Q words or the X words because those are going to be unique. One that stands out from middle school list is aardvark because it starts with a double A, and you know even the students themselves would ask other people, "Do you know how to spell aardvark?" Because most people don't put the two A's at the beginning. Um, Coinciding with my coaching in 2006, the movie Aquila and the Bee came out also in 2006. And for many of our season celebrations, we have watched the movie Aquila and the Bee. So I've seen it many, many times. And so I know most of the words that they use in the movie as well. And the students have watched it lots of times. So this year on the high school list was the word xylem. And the tricky thing about the word xylem is it starts with an X. Um, and so when we got to that page and we're looking down the list and I mentioned that word, several of them were like, "That's an Aquila and the Bee." They've learned words from other places as well, which is always fun. But then there's also fun words. This year on the high school team was flibberty gibbet. They loved that word. And you could ask any of them on the team this year, and they would all know how to spell flibberty gibbet just because it's a fun word. It's things like that. But then sometimes it's like the longest words that they challenge themselves. Bree Montel, who's a senior this year, she mentioned at our awards ceremony a couple weeks ago that her favorite word during high school was acetylsalicylic acid. It's one of the longest words that we have had on the list in the last 4 years for them. But she learned it and she knows how to spell it still. It's those things that you challenge yourself with. Um, and then there's I think the only other category I'll add is food words. For some reason, the high school team this year at least had practiced before school. The middle school team practiced after school, and the high schoolers are hungry in the morning, and the middle schoolers want a snack afterwards. And so when you start talking about food words, then that makes them hungrier. And but sometimes then I'll also ask, did you learn about that in Mrs. Beckner's class in family skills in middle school? But those are always fun words too.
Yeah. You talked about a lot of fun words. Talk about a little bit of complex words. Can we go into more of the complex words? Is there any like extra words you think were like the hardest you've ever had to
Oh,
deal with spell bowl?
oh, gee, the hardest. Um, so probably the words that don't start like they sound. So like pterodactyl, it starts with a P. This year we had the word tenaphore. Tenaphore starts with a C, and it's like, why? And they all talk about that. But again, if you asked any of them on the team this year, they would know that tenaphore starts with a C because we cover that over and over again in practice. Those tricky things, those hard words. Um, a lot of foreign words that come into the English language that we use on a regular basis. But I studied French for 5 years. I also took a course in Hawaiian language when I was in college. And I know those are both obscure, but there are so many French words that end up in our vernacular. This year we had au revoir. Um, uh, there's words that just sound strange because you're trying to decide, do I use the English pronunciation or do I use the language of origin pronunciation? We had a German word, Kieselgur, Kielsu. I'm gonna mess myself up. See, I'm not. I'm Spellbowl. You write them down. Kielsuhgr. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna just stop on that. But see, this is why I'm the coach, and they're the ones that spell the words. Gugr. Um, but it's a German word, and so you think, wow, okay, so why do I even need to know that word? But if you ever have the opportunity to travel internationally, or maybe you read something or watch a video about it. He brings me a pad of paper so I can write it down. Um, those I think that again helps expand your understanding of the world by some of these world languages and words that we incorporate into our language. And we just wonder, okay, why do we use that word? I have a calendar of the day at home that Mrs. Beckner gets me every year for Christmas. So I'm not anticipating that at all this year. But on the back, it even tells you the origin of the words, and so I'm very much into that. Words even that haven't been a part of Spell Bowl that I'm continuing to learn.
Yeah. And I think we're starting to get to the end of the series. So
Yes,
I've almost
sure.
run out of questions. Yeah. Is there anything like final touches you'd like to say?
Well, big thanks to Mrs. Beckner along the way for 20 years. Um, all of her support and help. She has done scoring for the middle school competitions for years, has gone along to the state finals and helped as a chaperone. Mrs. Wyatt was just instrumental the last 7 years working with Ava, but she stepped in and helped with other things on the team. And just, I'm just so grateful for parents who step in and help out in so many different ways as proctors for competitions, bringing in snacks, just supporting the team. And I think the things I'm going to take away from the last 20 years, yes, the words, but more importantly is the students that I've learned to know in those 20 years and continue to have a relationship with many of them.
Yeah. And I think that'll be all.
Yeah.
Yep. Good day.